BARP, bold, active, resourceful, proud. Nothing can stop us now.
Show the world that we're able and strong.
Nothing can stop us now.
Raise your voices and sing our song.
BARP, bold, active, resourceful, proud. BARP, bold, active, resourceful, proud.
We're bold, we're active, resourceful, and proud. We're bold, we're active, resourceful, and proud.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Belle Holder, and this is the Bringing It Home with BARP radio show. It's always a pleasure to share some time with you, so thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're going to take a deeper dive into the issue of elderly abandonment. Recently, BARP hosted an open forum which featured panelists including Minister of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, the Honorable Kirk Humphrey, BARP President Marilyn Rice-Bowen, psychologist and counselor Dr. Jennifer Deanne Forde, and human rights and gender activist Felicia Dujon. Today, we're going to hear some key aspects from that solution-oriented discussion, which included participants who shared their personal stories about caring for their elderly loved ones. Excerpts from that recent discussion are straight ahead right after this message from BARP. For your convenience, BARP's Life Benefits annual insurance premium of $58 can now be paid at BARP's head office at Merview House, all SurePay locations or SurePay online, by electronic direct bank transfer, at First Citizens, City of Bridgetown Cooperative Credit Union, Barbados Public Workers Cooperative Credit Union, Barbados Post Office branches. Multiple options for you to pay your BARP Life's Benefits annual insurance premium. For more info, call 538-2277 or email your queries about the BARP Life Benefit annual insurance to info@barpbb.org. Thank you so much for tuning in to Bringing It Home with BARP. This morning, we're looking at the issue of elderly abandonment. If we're going to talk about abandonment, we have to admit that people are not just being abandoned at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital or Harrison Point, because you can be abandoned in your own home. You can be abandoned by a caregiver in a care facility. And that's what we need to address in a holistic way and stamp it out. Ms. Rice-Bowen is here with us. She's the president of BARP, and we know that she's extremely passionate, but action-oriented passionate when it comes to the rights of the elderly. One of the things that you really stressed on, again, is if these situations, some of these situations are indeed linked to misappropriation of funds, or rather monies in terms of people's elderly persons and their pensions being misdirected or misused, then that's something that the law needs to look at very strongly. What is your position today?
As BARP, we are happy to have such a wide panel and panel with the necessary knowledge to seek solutions and to, of course, to continue to call elderly abandonment and call elderly abuse by name. Because unless you can identify it, then you can't fix it. I was privileged to be on a panel quite recently, and I learned some information which was to me quite startling, but we're not afraid because we're Caribbean people and we're resilient. But it says that in another 28 years, that's by year 2050, 50% of our population will be over 60. So what that is saying is that we have to realign our planning and recognize that what can happen back then in that period, that seniors may have to look after seniors. So there are areas that we can fix, like we can work towards with diet and see how we can reduce the level of NCDs, because that's a problem and that will impact on the financial, the spending power of the seniors. We also are concerned about the pensions and the fact that pensions are not indexed. We are also concerned about the lack of national retirement age, but we are very, very concerned about elderly abandonment. We have to remember that these persons that are being abandoned are our nation builders.
All right, thank you, Ms. Rice-Bowen. And Dr. Forde, I'm going to turn my attention to you. I do recall that in our recent discussion, one of the things that you really talked about was the structure of the family. We all know that in the Caribbean, the family structure has changed. I grew up in a situation where we had multiple generations from grandmother straight through to grandchildren living under the same roof for a period of time. And everybody is not in a situation where they do have loved ones in the true sense of the word LOVE. Young bad behaved people become old bad behaved people. And so, for example, if you are the type of person who did not treat younger members of the family well or treat your family well, but now you're in a situation where you need help for the most basic human things, and you have now a certain expectation of those children that maybe you were not so loving toward, how can you then be surprised that they don't want to take care of you? What's your response to that from a psychological standpoint?
Hi, Belle. Yes, with regards to family, very important. And in fact, I had a situation when I used to lecture on campus where a student said, I'm not looking after her. She didn't do anything for me. I had to remind her that she needed her mom to be born, but she still didn't let up. Obviously, the treatment to her that was meted out to her was not kind. That being said, we have to recognize, going off from what Marilyn said, the population, the 60 and older population, will be doubled in absolute terms from 900 million to 2 billion people by 2050. So we have to start tackling the problem now. It's a serious problem. Many thousands of people every year suffer with some form of abuse. And abandonment is only one aspect of that abuse. And yes, what you said about we can't blame people if they leave their loved ones sometimes. The reasons and causes are myriad. There's many, many reasons why these people could say, I can't do it. One of it, yes, it would be finance. But then there's the psychological wear and tear on the caregiver, the child who is tasked with the problem of looking after the mother, the other sister or the other brother who is going on with their life and not bothering with mommy, and then everybody come around for the reading of the will. You touched on the extended family in the Caribbean. The extended family is dying everywhere. It doesn't, in some cultures, it doesn't exist anymore. By and large, we are probably becoming a little more selfish. But there's another side to that. There's what we call the boomerang family, where children are boomeranging back home because the economy is too much for them to stay out. So maybe that might bring about some kind of change in how they care for their elderly. There might be no empty nesters. The fact remains is it's a serious problem. It threatens family life, and we have to start putting things in place now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Forde. I think we all agree that this would fall under the ambit of elderly abuse, certainly if we're talking about abandoning an individual. And one of the things that I know that Ms. Dujon has certainly brought to the floor is that then this definitely becomes a human rights issue.
So in the case of fathers, we've seen a diversion where fathers in our society, we tend to think about that we tend to care about our mothers more likely than our fathers. And that has been because mothers are more nurturing and people tend to think more in terms of caring for the mother and as opposed to the father. And of course, we can also imagine in terms of absent fathers in the household. So you can almost imagine what would happen to that individual in later stages in his life. So what we're seeing, the statistic is showing that right now we have more males being abandoned at the hospital or at the geriatric hospitals. So it's very important for us as a society to start reflecting on what are some of the responsibilities of us as individuals, but also as males within the society. Because we're seeing that kind of record, or we see that kind of progression where men are being abandoned, what does that signal for the society? And when we think about those fundamental rights, we think about rights for children, we think about rights for women, we think about rights for men and young and for the youth. But there's one thing that we are missing. We do not have legislation that is geared for elder abuse. And this is something that we need to change. And I'm very glad that our minister is here with us today so that we can speak about policy development. Because you can have rights, you have those fundamental rights. But if you do not have the support of the state, what kinds of protection will individuals within our society? So something happens within the household or within the community. How will that person be able to make a report? How will be that person? What kinds of support is there? Legal support is there for those individuals. So it's very important that when we think, my position at this point is really to advocate for an Elder Justice Act that will ensure that senior citizens within our societies are protected by the law, by the state. So when we have elder abuse, when we have elder abandonment, there are clear guidance so that the police would know what to do, the persons that work in the various institutions, including the various civil organizations, they will know exactly how to provide guidance to not only families, but persons within the community. So we need to start thinking about legislative kind of performance so that people are aware that there is law.
Thank you, Ms. Dujon. If we're going to speak to a change of legislative policy for care and the rights of the elderly, it is fitting then that we hear now from Minister of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, Minister Kirk Humphrey. We'll be right back with Minister Humphrey right after this message from BARP. Please note, BARP's 27th Annual General Meeting will be held on Thursday, July 28, 2022, 4 p.m. at the Hilton Hotel. The evening will include the election of a new board of directors and the presentation of the auditor's report. Save the date, Thursday, July 28th, 4 p.m. at the Hilton Hotel for BARP's Annual General Meeting. We'll see you there.
Now, as soon as we hear the word legislation, Minister Humphrey, I'm going to be coming to you. I know you're bracing for your response. I spoke to a representative from the National Assistance Board, and one of the things that she shared with me is that they get, on average, about 10 reports per week at the National Assistance Board of abuse. Now, when it comes to legislation, it takes a long time. We know that. So, Minister Humphrey, where is it? Where is government's position?
This conversation has been going on for a very long time. Most recently in the ministry, under the guidance of former Minister Forde, there was work with PAHO to develop a policy. And the policy is being done now. There was a situation analysis done that gave us a general overview, very detailed, actually, information on the status of elderly in Barbados. And so we have most of the facts. The drafting of the legislation will be done at the same time that we're doing the policy. I said at the last meeting that we're hoping to have that draft by the end of the year, if not the calendar year, by the financial year, and to be able to implement policy to protect our elderly. But when I used to work in taxes, I took the view that I'm also taking now, which is that the penalties and so on written into the legislation to prevent a person from doing a misdeed is not where we need to start. If we're serious about protecting elderly people, it cannot be the legislation. We have to have a much more holistic view as to the challenges facing older people. And that is why in study of gerontology, you start studying older people from birth. I feel this is a conversation we need to be having in our schools in relation to how do you treat people generally, and how do you treat older people more specifically. I feel it is a conversation we need to be having with families. That is why the ministry is moving toward a family orientation, so that we talk to families about their roles in relation to how do you treat your older persons, but how do you treat one another? What is being meted out to elderly people is being meted out to y'all on a daily basis. We just don't take it the same, because a lot of the values that kept us in society has changed, and the things that we took for granted no longer obtain. I also hold the view that you should never find yourself responding to anything you should see coming. We all in this conversation know full well that Barbados has an aging society. In the region, we have by far the most rapid rate of increase, and we already have the larger aging population. It is obvious to all of us here that in a few years, we will have more people who are not in the workforce because they're either too young to be working or too old to be, or older to be working, and that productive space is getting smaller, which is going to pose a threat to the NIS. So we're going to have a conversation around the NIS. We also have to have a conversation around how do people eat so that they don't get as sick when they get older. I think it's a very complex situation, and yes, the legislation. And I've said to the persons, former Minister Forde is advising now and leading on it, but I've been very clear that when you see the penalties that we're proposing, that we're discussing and will propose in relation to how people should be penalized for such treatment, you will know that we are not kidding. But the penalties only come into force after it has been done. And so what I'm trying to do is to line up the country and line up the society in such a way that we prevent it from happening. It is also obvious that if we have a ratio of elderly people, then by statistics alone, you're likely to have a large population of persons who are likely to be abused. And so I feel we have to work on it as a society and that we have to tackle it from that end. To that end, I had a very interesting conversation with the Ministry of Health today in relation, because I keep hearing about the number of persons in the hospital and so on. And today, as it stands today, there were 16 persons at QEH who would be considered abandoned. 9 at Harrison Point who would be considered abandoned. The average for the QEH would be 30. And that the vast majority of those are males. And, you know, when you have itinerant fathers, you know, visiting fathers who come and go, who don't check for their children, and then expect children to love them automatically, it's a very difficult proposition for many children, for many people. So I understand all of that. And that is why I understand that it's abandonment, no matter how I spin it. But I also feel that the person who's responsible for care also needs to be cautiously assessed and judged, but judged righteously, and with a view to building a structure that would allow us to take care of everyone within this space.
Thank you, Minister Humphrey. Okay, so as an only child, the responsibility to care for her aging parents fell squarely on Judith Gittins' shoulders, who at one time also served in an administrative capacity at a care facility. Here's her story.
I went through the gamut with my dad. The medical, I went through the legal, I went through instances of education, I went through training. My father was diagnosed with dementia when he was about 74. And I am an only child, and so my mother was the primary caretaker. We did everything we were told to do by the medical professionals, and my father progressed. And my mother continued to care for him. I saw my mother deteriorate, and the doctor said to me, look, if you want your mother to live, you need to institutionalize him. I can get emotional, and I broke down because I know this was something he did not want, okay? And as an only child, what am I supposed to do? Anyway, we took the decision with institutionalize him. My father went to a nursing home and he got worse. In the meantime, I got married, had a child, living my own life, but I had to come back and deal with my mother and my father's situation. Thankfully, they had a pension. I brought my father back home. The long short of it is hard. I had to go before the court with a medical, this is so hard to describe, a medical certificate and a legal document to say that I was truly going to take care of all of his needs, financial, medical, you name it. And I had to prove that I was going to do it and do it in a way that was not going to be abusive to him or in a way that was going to cause my parental situation to worsen. So I had to bring my financials. I had to give the court a running breakdown, financial breakdown monthly, so that it didn't look like I was using his funds. As my father deteriorated, the doctors would know with dementia, we had to get nursing care. Thankfully, again, we could afford it. But it's not easy. I think Marilyn mentioned it as well. We had to change the house, configure the house. My father deteriorated till the nurses can handle it. I had to be trained to turn him the works. Thankfully, he lived for 10 years. When my daughter was born, and that's something I want to share, merging old and young people is a beautiful thing. He couldn't speak, but his face would light up. And so I want to transition now to my role as an administrator of this village a few years ago. That model needs replicated in Barbados, okay? It's a small housing unit, 1 bathroom, 1 bedroom. Seniors who even have mobility issues can move around quite easily. They obviously have to take a medical test to prove that they can manage themselves, but they have guarantors. So when their medical situation worsens, their financial situation worsens, those guarantors are called in. They pay a nominal rent, they have their friends, and then they would come into the center every day and we'd have activities. So my term is aging abundantly. It was beautiful. We would have parties, we would have outings, we would keep their minds active, we would bring in people to have talks. We had a relationship with the polyclinic, even with the vaccines. Recently, they got vaccines. I know that Sagicor is doing a retirement village, but frankly, that's a mortgage that nobody can afford. Okay? If there is a way that we can take the sector to try to replicate that this model, I think it would be a great thing. I also want to add that retirement planning is just not about finances. The one thing I noticed with my dad is purpose. So even though he was diagnosed at 76, he still had purpose. My father would go and teach. He was a musician and a teacher. He would teach until he couldn't teach anymore. He would sing in churches till he couldn't sing anymore. There has to be purposeful aging, meaningful aging. It's not just about money. The negative, I will say, is when he did pass, my mother was not allowed to get survivor's benefit. Today, I don't know why. I don't know if her pension was too big. It still got me back, so you can kind of hear it in my voice. But anyhow, thankfully, our family was one after. And the burden does fall, even if you have 3 and 4 sisters and brothers, it falls with one person. One person is going to take that on. My final comment, something that Minister Humphrey mentioned about the different tiers and layers. I have worked on that. It's called risk pooling, where you look at different categories of seniors. Quite frankly, you start from much younger. You can't wait till people get old, because we have young people who right now who are disabled who are going to fall into that category as well. And you work through that risk pooling. You have to have long-term planning. Caregiver burnout is real. And the one thing I will say, the only thing I wanted from the state was information, and I got it. I was able to have training, just so some of you know. I learned how to turn my dad because I wanted to be involved. I believe that he needed to be dignified down to his death, and that he was. So I just wanted to share that. I know it was long, but I hope it was useful. And I want to provide support to anybody, particularly on that legal piece, because it's a nightmare. But I was able to do it with support. And Marilyn or anybody else, I am here. I want to volunteer myself.
Judith, thank you so much for sharing your personal story with us. We'll hear now from Adele Stewart, who is a field officer with the National Household Mitigation Unit. And he's also adding his voice to the discussion based on his own personal experience with caring for both of his aging parents.
Because I had both parents who I had to look after at a young age. Fortunately or unfortunately for me, I would say fortunately, my father was way older than my mother, but he led a very interesting life. And who it was that said that pairing younger and older people together, I found that what kept them going well in the house is most of my younger friends in my age group that will come by, my father used to enjoy telling his stories about his life in the war and the police force and all the different places he lived. But in agreement with Dr. Forde said, we have to really re-educate people, because my philosophy now, coming out of all of that, I learned so much from them, especially my father. One thing we know when we are born is that there's one thing we know, that we all born to die. And we plan for everything else on this earth, but aging and dying. And I think we need to re-educate ourselves and start putting these plans in place at an early age. Even now where I work, I see the whole ugly part of that played out. When you did not make a decision about your property, you die, it's just left there hanging. In the pandemic brought to the forefront some very serious problems, whereby houses that were left by grandparents for all the siblings, because it was not left for any one person, because sometimes families know that, they don't live well together, but make a decision on it. If they can't do that, let it be sold, divide the money and give each person the money and let it go the way rejoicing. But what I found came to the forefront in the pandemic, it showed up people were living in houses, not homes. So you had situations where there were siblings that lived with other siblings that were only sharing the house because you can't put them out because how the house was left, but they never contributed to the house. So others said to you, okay, well, if you live in here, you ain't contributing to the home, so you can't cook no food from my stove, you can't use my gas. So when the pandemic came, all the eating places shut down, and they were shut up, and they couldn't go outside the curtilage, and they were shut up in the house for the first time with their siblings. They had some serious mental problems because they were in that house, others cooking and eating, and then they had to wait for the alphabet day to go to the supermarket to buy dry ration and eat it. And this was the reality that happened. But as I said, it all calls for education at the end of the day, and I'm willing to contribute my whole life story with looking after my parents. That is a story in a book by itself. And I'm always there. If anybody want my assistance, I will offer it to you.
Thank you so much, Adele. We will wrap things up right after this message from BARP. Calling all BARP members, please note BARP's 27th Annual General Meeting will be held on Thursday, July 28th, 2022, 4 p.m. at the Hilton Hotel. The evening will include the election of a new board of directors and the presentation of the auditor's report. Save the date, Thursday, July 28th, 4 p.m. at the Hilton Hotel for BARP's Annual General Meeting. We'll see you there. Okay, so today we have placed the issue of elderly abandonment on the front burner, looking at solutions to this issue and ways to educate, legislate, and tackle the root causes of elder abuse and specifically elderly abandonment before it occurs. BARP President Marilyn Rice-Bowen kicked off the discussion, so we're going to come back to you, Marilyn, now to wrap things up.
I want to thank the panelists for making BARP a priority today, because I know your schedules are extremely heavy. So you recognize the importance of this discussion, and I want to place on public record our gratitude. Also, thanks to the members of BARP and the members who join us for this discussion. Where do we go from here? We will be, of course, we're supposed to meet with the minister shortly, so we'll get that, we'll work on that appointment. But in the interim, while we wait for legislation, while we wait for policy to be framed, we will continue our work. And I've said it repeatedly, we recognize that there are persons who are in need of assistance from a mental health perspective. And I want to again thank Dr. Deanne Forde for offering her services and the services of her team. So BARP, we've recognized that we must fix as we wait, we must fix as we go. So that is what we have done. And mental health is extremely important. And we also recognize that seniors experience loneliness at a higher level than those of us who are mobile. As BARP, we remain resolute in our commitment to pave the way for our nation builders, to pave the way for our reservoirs of knowledge, because there are indeed reservoirs of knowledge and of ancestors, and we revere our elders, and we will demonstrate through our continued action and our service that their role is important in Barbados and to BARP and in our lives as well. And I said before, and I can't help but say, but you know, when you have a statement of fact, you must amplify it. BARP is the beacon, and we will continue to let our light shine.
Thank you so much. I want to say thank you so much to all of our guests this morning, Minister Humphrey, Ms. Rice-Bowen, Ms. Dujon, and Dr. Forde. We definitely look forward to having you. Thanks, everybody. Have a safe and wonderful day.
BARP, bold, active, resourceful, proud. Nothing can stop us now.
Show the world that we're able and strong.
Nothing can stop us now.
Raise your voices and sing our song.
BARP, bold, active, resourceful, proud.